Detective Inspector Sarah Chen had seen many strange cases during her 15 years with the Metropolitan Police. But nothing quite like this. The anonymous letter arrived at Scotland Yard on a rainy Tuesday morning, written in elegant handwriting on expensive cream paper. The message was brief but shocking. The Queen's missing sapphires are hidden in Camillas' private estate. Check the wine cellar beneath the rose garden. Sarah stared at the letter for the third time, her coffee growing cold. The missing crown jewels had been a mystery for over 2 years. 3 priceless sapphires from Queen Victoria's personal collection had vanished during a routine cleaning at Buckingham Palace. The theft had been kept secret from the public, known only to a handful of senior officials and investigators. The letter bore no signature, no fingerprints, and no DNA evidence. Whoever sent it knew exactly how to avoid detection. Sarah's partner, Detective Sergeant Mark Williams, leaned over her shoulder to read the message again. "Could be a hoax," Mark suggested, though his voice carried doubt. "Plenty of people would love to cause trouble for the royal family." Sarah folded the letter carefully. The details are too specific. Whoever wrote this knows about the missing sapphires. That information was classified. Their supervisor, Chief Inspector Davies, called them into his office an hour later. His face was grim as he closed the door behind them. "I've just spoken with the palace security team. We're to investigate this matter immediately, but with absolute discretion." The drive to Camillas' countryside estate took 2 hours through winding English lanes. Sarah had visited many grand homes during her career, but this property was breathtaking. The Georgian mansion sat surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens, with ancient oak trees casting long shadows across the emerald lawns. Royal protection. Officer James Mitchell met them at the front gates. He was a tall man in his 40s, with sharp blue eyes and the rigid posture of someone who had served in the military. Sarah noticed how his hand rested casually near his concealed weapon. "Her Royal Highness is attending a charity event in London today," James explained as he led them up the gravel driveway. "She's unaware of your visit, and we'd prefer to keep it that way unless absolutely necessary." The estate manager, Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, greeted them at the mansion's front entrance. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and worried lines around her eyes. She had managed the property for 20 years and took obvious pride in maintaining its pristine condition. "I can't imagine what you're looking for," Mrs. Hartwell said as she led them through the grand hallway. "Nothing has been disturbed here. We run a very secure household." Sarah studied the portraits lining the walls, images of previous estate owners dating back centuries. "We need to examine the wine cellar, particularly the area beneath the rose garden." Mrs. Hartwell's expression shifted slightly. "The old cellars. They haven't been used for storage in years. We modernized the wine collection and moved everything to temperature-controlled rooms in the main house." James Mitchell guided them through the mansion's lower level. The corridors were narrower here, with stone walls that spoke of the building's ancient foundations. The air grew cooler as they descended further underground. The wine cellar was larger than Sarah had expected, arched stone ceilings and rows of empty wooden racks. Dust motes danced in the beam of their flashlights. The space felt forgotten, abandoned to time and shadows. "The rose garden is directly above us," Mrs. Hartwell explained, pointing toward the ceiling. "These cellars extend beneath most of the formal gardens." Mark began examining the walls systematically, looking for any signs of recent disturbance. Sarah focused on the floor, searching for loose stones or hidden compartments. The investigation seemed hopeless until James noticed something unusual. "This wall looks different," he said, running his hand along a section of stone near the far corner. "The mortar is newer here." Sarah joined him, examining the area more closely. Someone had indeed reconstructed part of the wall, though they had done an excellent job matching the original stonework. Without careful inspection, the repair would have been invisible. Mrs. Hartwell frowned. "I don't remember any renovation work in this area. When would this have been done?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Thomas, the head gardener, appeared at the cellar entrance. He was an elderly man with weathered hands and soil under his fingernails. Someone who had worked the estate grounds for decades. "Begging your pardon," Thomas said hesitantly, "but I couldn't help overhearing. There was work done down here about 18 months ago. A team of specialists came to repair some water damage. They said it was urgent, something about protecting the foundation. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances. 18 months ago was exactly when the crown jewels had disappeared from Buckingham Palace. Who authorized this work? James demanded. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. It came through the estate office. Mrs. Hartwell was visiting her sister in Scotland that week, so the assistant manager handled the arrangements. Mrs. Hartwell looked genuinely shocked. I was never informed about any foundation repairs. This is highly irregular. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. The pieces were beginning to fit together, though the full picture remained unclear. Someone with access to the estate's management had used Mrs. Hartwell's absence to arrange unauthorized construction work in the cellars. Mark was already on his phone, calling for additional equipment. They would need specialized tools to examine the wall without damaging any potential evidence inside. As they waited for the forensic team to arrive, Sarah studied the faces around her. Mrs. Hartwell appeared genuinely surprised by the revelations about the construction work. Thomas seemed nervous, but cooperative. James Mitchell remained professional. Though she noticed him watching everyone carefully, the anonymous letter had been accurate about the location. Someone knew exactly where to direct their search. The question was whether that someone was trying to expose a crime or cover their tracks by shifting blame to others. The sound of vehicles arriving outside echoed through the cellar. Sarah's investigation was just beginning, but she already sensed they were dealing with more than a simple theft. The crown jewels had disappeared into a web of careful planning and precise execution. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide the sapphires in this forgotten corner of the estate. Now Sarah had to determine whether they were closing in on the thief or walking into an elaborate trap designed to protect the real criminal. The truth lay behind that reconstructed wall, waiting to be discovered. The forensic team arrived with ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging equipment. Dr. Amanda Foster, lead forensics expert, set up her instruments while Sarah watched the display screens intently. The images revealed a clear hollow space behind the reconstructed wall section. There's definitely something there, Dr. Foster confirmed, pointing to the anomaly on her screen. The cavity is roughly the size of a briefcase, maybe 18 inches wide. James Mitchell received permission from Palace Security to proceed with opening the wall. The process was delicate, requiring careful removal of stones to preserve any evidence. Each piece was photographed and catalogued before being set aside. Mrs. Hartwell paced nervously in the corridor above. 20 years I've managed this estate, she muttered to herself. Nothing like this has ever happened before. Thomas, the gardener, remained nearby to answer questions about the mysterious construction work. His memory was sharp despite his age, and he provided crucial details about the repair team's activities. They worked only at night, Thomas recalled. Said it was to avoid disrupting the household routine. 3 men, very professional. They brought their own materials and cleaned up perfectly when finished. Mark discovered the first real clue when examining the repair work more closely. Hidden beneath layers of mortar was a small piece of fabric, caught between 2 stones. The material was dark blue silk, with an unusual weave pattern. This isn't from work clothes, Mark observed, carefully extracting the fabric with tweezers. This is expensive material, possibly from formal clothing. Sarah bagged the evidence while considering the implications. Someone wearing formal attire had been present during the wall's reconstruction. This wasn't the work of ordinary construction workers. The breakthrough came when they finally opened the hidden cavity. Inside was a waterproof container, sealed and carefully positioned. Dr. Foster's hands trembled slightly as she lifted it out. The container held, each one perfectly cut and mounted in elaborate gold settings. The gems caught the light from their flashlights, throwing brilliant blue reflections across the cellar walls. Queen Victoria's sapphires, James whispered, his professional composure cracking for a moment. They're really here. Sarah felt a mixture of triumph and confusion. The anonymous tip had been completely accurate, but recovering the jewels only deepened the mystery. Who had hidden them here, and why had someone else revealed their location? Mrs. Hartwell was summoned to the cellar to witness the discovery. Her face went pale when she saw the crown jewels lying in the evidence container. "I swear I knew nothing about this," she said, her voice shaking. "Someone used my estate to hide stolen property. This will destroy my reputation." The investigation shifted focus to identifying the mysterious construction team. Thomas provided detailed descriptions of the three workers, and a police artist began creating composite sketches. The leader was a thin man with prematurely gray hair, Thomas explained. Very well spoken, not like a typical construction worker. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Mark began checking records with local construction companies. It's looking for any team that had worked in the area 18 months ago. The legitimate companies had no record of work at the estate, confirming that the repair team had been operating under false pretenses. Dr. Foster's examination of the container revealed fingerprints on the inner surface. The prints were partial but potentially useful for identification. She also found traces of a distinctive cologne on the fabric evidence. "This is an expensive fragrance," Dr. Foster noted, analyzing the scent residue. "Something custom blended, not available in regular stores." Sarah began piecing together a timeline of events. The sapphires had disappeared from Buckingham Palace during routine cleaning. Within weeks, someone had arranged fake construction work at Camillas' estate to create a hiding place. The operation required inside knowledge of both the palace's security procedures and the estate's management schedule. James, a Mitchell, made a troubling observation. Very few people knew about Mrs. Hartwell's planned absence that week. The information was restricted to essential personnel only. The list of suspects was small but significant. It included the assistant estate manager, who had authorized the work, several palace security officials who knew about the theft, and a handful of household staff with access to scheduling information. Sarah decided to interview the assistant estate manager first. Rebecca Martinez was a competent woman in her 30s who had worked for the royal household for 8 years. She maintained detailed records and had an excellent reputation. Rebecca seemed genuinely confused when questioned about the construction authorization. "I remember approving emergency repairs, but I was told it was urgent work to prevent flood damage. The paperwork came through proper channels." Further investigation revealed that the work order had been submitted using forged credentials. Someone had created false documentation that perfectly mimicked the estate's official procedures. "This level of forgery requires sophisticated knowledge of our systems," Rebecca explained. "Whoever did this had studied our processes very carefully." The forensic accountant discovered that payment for the fake construction work had been made through a complex series of shell companies. The money trail led through 3 different countries before disappearing into an untraceable offshore account. Mark found security footage from a nearby village that showed a luxury car visiting the estate during the night when the work was performed. The vehicle's license plate was clearly visible, though it was later discovered to be stolen. The car had been reported missing from a London parking garage 2 days before the construction work began. It was found abandoned in a different location 3 days later. Professionally cleaned and showing no forensic evidence, Sarah realized. They were dealing with a highly organized criminal operation. The theft of the crown jewels had been planned months in advance, every detail carefully considered and executed. The question remained: who had sent the anonymous letter that led to the recovery? The handwriting analysis was inconclusive, but the expensive paper suggested someone with refined tastes and financial means. James Mitchell proposed a troubling theory. What if this was always meant to be discovered? The thief steals the jewels, hides them here, then arranges for their recovery when convenient. Sarah considered the possibility. Perhaps the real crime wasn't theft, but something more complex. Someone might have used the missing jewels as leverage in a different scheme entirely. Late that evening, as the investigation team prepared to leave the estate, Thomas approached Sarah with additional information. "I remembered something else about that night," he said quietly. "I heard voices arguing in the garden. One of them was definitely a woman, and she sounded very angry." This new detail suggested that not everyone involved in the operation had been in agreement. Perhaps someone had developed second thoughts about the plan, leading to the eventual anonymous tip. The recovery of the crown jewels should have ended the case. But Sarah knew their investigation was just beginning. The real mystery lay in understanding why someone had taken such an enormous risk, only to ensure the jewels would eventually be found. The news of the crown jewels recovery sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. Sarah and Mark were summoned to meet with Sir Charles Pemberton, the palace's head of security. In a private conference room overlooking the palace gardens, Sir Charles was a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to handling delicate situations. He had served the royal family for 30 years and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of palace protocols. The recovery is excellent news. Of course, Sir Charles began, but we must understand how this breach occurred. The implications for royal security are enormous. Sarah spread the evidence across the conference table. The fingerprints from the container had been processed through the national database, yielding a surprising result. The prints belong to Marcus Whitfield, Sarah announced. He's a former palace employee who worked in the crown jewels security detail 5 years ago. Mark pulled up Whitfield's personnel file on his tablet. He left royal service under somewhat mysterious circumstances. His supervisor noted concerns about gambling debts, but no formal charges were filed. Sir Charles frowned deeply. I remember Whitfield. Brilliant man, very knowledgeable about our security systems. His departure was diplomatically handled to avoid scandal. The investigation into Whitfield's current activities revealed a man living far beyond his apparent means. He owned an expensive London apartment, drove luxury vehicles, and frequented high-end establishments despite having no visible source of income. His bank records show regular large deposits from offshore accounts, Mark explained. The pattern suggests he's been receiving payment for something over the past 2 years. Sarah suspected they were dealing with more than simple theft. Someone hired Whitfield for his inside knowledge of palace security. The question is, who had that kind of money and motivation? Their investigation led them to an exclusive private club in Mayfair, where Whitfield was known to spend his evenings. The club catered to wealthy international clients, many of whom valued discretion above all else. The club manager, Geoffrey Harrington, was reluctant to discuss members' activities but eventually provided limited cooperation under pressure from authorities. Mr. Whitfield often met with a particular woman here, Geoffrey admitted. They seemed to conduct business, always in the private dining rooms, very secretive about their conversations. The woman was described as elegant, well-dressed, and speaking with a slight European accent. Security cameras had captured her image, though she was careful to avoid direct facial shots. Dr. Foster's analysis of the footage revealed important details. She's wearing a distinctive brooch in several images. The design appears to be a family crest or coat of arms. Sarah enlisted the help of a heraldry expert to identify the symbol. Professor David Ashworth spent hours analyzing the brooch's intricate design before making a startling discovery. This crest belongs to the Montclair family, Professor Ashworth explained. They're minor European nobility, but they have a fascinating connection to British royal history. The Montclair family had once owned several pieces that were later incorporated into the crown jewels collection. Queen Victoria had acquired some of their hereditary gems during a period of political upheaval in the mid-1800s. The current head of the family is Countess Isabella Montclair, Professor Ashworth continued. She's been quietly pursuing legal claims for the return of various family treasures for decades. This revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of the case. The theft might not have been about money, but about reclaiming what the Montclair family considered rightfully theirs. Mark began researching Countess Isabella's recent activities. She had been in London frequently over the past year, staying at expensive hotels and meeting with lawyers specializing in art recovery and cultural property disputes. She's been building a case for the return of her family's jewels, Mark discovered. Her legal team has been quietly gathering historical documentation to support their claims. Sarah realized the implications. What if the theft was meant to create a crisis that would force negotiations? Steal the jewels, then offer information about their recovery in exchange for legal concessions. James Mitchell provided additional insight from his palace security perspective. There have been several unofficial inquiries about the Montclair family's claims. Nothing formal, but enough to suggest someone was testing the palace's position. The investigation team decided to approach Countess Isabella directly. She was staying at the Langham Hotel, occupying a suite that cost more per night than most people earned in a month. Countess Isabella Montclair proved to be a woman of remarkable composure. She was in her 50s, with dark hair elegantly styled and an aristocratic bearing that spoke of generations of privilege. Her English was perfect, though tinged with a faint accent that hinted at her European heritage. "I understand you wish to discuss certain recovered items," she said, inviting them into her suite sitting room. "I assume this relates to property that belonged to my family for centuries." Sarah studied the Countess carefully. "We're investigating the theft of crown jewels from Buckingham Palace. Your name has come up in our inquiries." The Countess smiled slightly. "I'm not surprised. My family has been seeking the return of our hereditary treasures for many years. The legal process, however, moves quite slowly." When confronted with evidence linking her to Marcus Whitfield, the Countess remained calm. "Mr. Whitfield approached me with information about certain historical injustices. I found his perspective quite enlightening." Mark pressed for more details. "What kind of information?" "Documentation about how my family's property came to be in the Crown collection," she replied. "The circumstances were not entirely honorable." The Countess produced a leather portfolio containing historical documents, photographs, and legal correspondence spanning decades. The materials painted a picture of systematic efforts to recover family treasures that had been taken during political upheavals. "My great-great-grandmother was forced to sell these jewels during a period of financial crisis," the Countess explained. "The sale was conducted under duress, and the price was far below their actual value." Sarah examined the documents, many of which appeared authentic and historically significant. The legal case for return was stronger than she had anticipated. "Even assuming your claims have merit," Sarah said, "theft is not an acceptable solution. If you were involved in taking those sapphires—" The Countess interrupted gently. "I would never condone theft, Detective Inspector. However, I might provide information that helps resolve certain mysteries, particularly if it advances legitimate discussions about historical justice." The conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Mark stepped aside to answer, returning with a grave expression. "Marcus Whitfield has been found dead in his apartment," Mark announced quietly. "Initial reports suggest suicide, but they're treating it as suspicious." The Countess showed no visible reaction to this news, but Sarah noticed her hands tighten slightly around her teacup. The investigation had taken a dark turn, and their primary suspect was no longer available for questioning, Sarah realized. They were dealing with forces more dangerous than simple theft. Someone was willing to kill to protect their secrets. And the recovery of the crown jewels might have triggered a deadly chain of events. Marcus Whitfield's apartment was located in an upscale area of Chelsea, filled with expensive furniture and artwork that clearly exceeded what a former palace employee should have been able to afford. The scene suggested suicide, with Whitfield found in his study with a handwritten confession beside him. Dr. Foster examined the scene with her usual thorough attention to detail. Something about the arrangement troubled her professional instincts. Though she couldn't immediately identify what felt wrong, the confession letter admits to stealing the crown jewels, Dr. Foster reported to Sarah. It claims he acted alone out of financial desperation. "Very convenient timing, considering our investigation." Sarah read the confession carefully. The handwriting appeared to match Whitfield's style from his personnel files, but the content felt rehearsed and artificial. "This doesn't fit with what we know," Sarah observed. Whitfield was receiving regular payments from somewhere. He wasn't desperate for money. Mark discovered Whitfield's computer had been wiped clean just hours before his death. Professional data recovery specialists were called in, but early attempts to retrieve information proved unsuccessful. The forensic pathologist, Dr. Richard Thompson, arrived to examine the body. His preliminary findings raised immediate concerns about the suicide theory. "The angle of the wound is unusual," Dr. Thompson explained quietly. "While suicide remains possible, the positioning suggests someone else might have been present." Sarah ordered the apartment sealed as a potential crime scene. If Whitfield had been murdered, his death was connected to their investigation of the crown jewels theft. Meanwhile, Countess Isabella had checked out of her hotel, and left London on a private flight to Switzerland. Her departure so soon after Whitfield's death seems suspicious, though she had committed no provable crimes. James Mitchell provided disturbing news from his palace security contacts. There have been other incidents recently. 2 more former employees have died under questionable circumstances in the past 6 months. The pattern was alarming. Someone was systematically eliminating people with inside knowledge of palace security procedures. Whitfield's death might be part of a larger cover-up operation. Sarah decided to investigate the other suspicious deaths. The first victim was Patricia Henley, a former cleaner who had worked in the Crown Jewels display area. She had supposedly died in a car accident 3 months earlier. The accident report showed Patricia's vehicle had crashed on a remote country road late at night. Local police found no evidence of mechanical failure or drunk driving, concluding she had fallen asleep at the wheel. Patricia was known for being extremely careful, her supervisor told Sarah during a follow-up interview. She never drove when tired and always took main roads. That accident never made sense to us. The second victim was David Cross, a former security technician who had installed alarm systems in sensitive palace areas. His death was officially ruled an accidental overdose, though he had no known history of drug use. David was planning to leave the country, his brother revealed during questioning. He seemed scared about something, but wouldn't explain what was bothering him. Sarah realized they were dealing with a sophisticated conspiracy that extended far beyond simple theft. Someone was methodically eliminating anyone who might expose their operation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas, the gardener from Camillas' estate, called with additional information. He had remembered about the night of the fake construction work. "I found something in the garden the next morning," Thomas explained over the phone. "A business card that must have been dropped. I kept it in case someone came looking for it." Business card belonged to a private investigation firm called Meridian Security Solutions. Company specialized in corporate intelligence and asset recovery. With offices in London, Geneva, and Monaco, Mark researched Meridian Security and discovered they had an impressive client list of wealthy individuals, multinational corporations, and even some government agencies. Their services included discrete problem resolution and asset location and recovery. "This is a high-end outfit," Mark reported. "They charge enormous fees and guarantee complete confidentiality. Exactly the kind of company someone like Countess Isabella would hire." Sarah obtained a warrant to search Meridian Security's London offices. The company's managing director, Victoria Ashford, was a former MI6 officer with extensive connections in the intelligence community. "We provide completely legal services to our clients," Victoria stated firmly when questioned. "If someone used our business card inappropriately, we would want to know about it immediately." The search of Meridian's offices revealed sophisticated surveillance equipment, encrypted communication systems, and files on various high-profile investigations. However, any records related to Countess Isabella or the Crown Jewels had been thoroughly sanitized. Dr. Foster made a crucial discovery while re-examining evidence from Whitfield's apartment. Hidden in the binding of a book on a shelf was a small USB drive containing encrypted files. "The encryption is military grade," their IT specialist reported. "It could take months to break without the proper keys." However, Whitfield had made a critical mistake. The USB drive also contained an unencrypted document with partial passwords and notes about his activities. The decrypted files revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Whitfield had been recruited not just to steal the crown jewels, but to gather intelligence on palace security systems for a much larger operation. There are detailed floor plans of restricted areas, guard rotation schedules, and technical specifications for alarm systems, Sarah read from the decoded files. This information could be used to plan multiple thefts. The files also contained correspondence between Whitfield and his handlers at Meridian Security. The messages revealed that the crown jewels theft was intended as a test run for something much more ambitious. They were planning to steal the entire crown jewels collection during the next public ceremony. Mark realized with horror the theft of the sapphires was just practice. Sarah immediately contacted Sir Charles Pemberton to warn him of the potential threat. Palace security would need to be completely overhauled before any public events involving the crown jewels. The investigation team worked through the night to understand the full conspiracy. Evidence suggested that Countess Isabella was just one of several clients funding Meridian Securities operations against various royal collections across Europe. This is organized crime on an international scale, Sarah concluded. They're targeting royal treasures and cultural artifacts for wealthy private collectors. James Mitchell discovered that similar thefts had occurred at royal palaces in Sweden, Belgium, and the Netherlands over the past 2 years. The pattern was consistent. Inside information was used to plan precise operations that initially appeared successful, but ultimately resulted in recovery of the stolen items. Not keeping the treasures, James realized. They're using the thefts to create leverage for legal challenges and insurance claims. Sarah understood the brilliant complexity of the scheme. By stealing items and then facilitating their recovery, the criminals could claim credit for solving the crimes while actually profiting from insurance, payouts, and legal settlements. The deaths of Whitfield, Patricia, and David suggested that some participants had tried to expose the operation or demand larger shares of the profits. Meridian Security was eliminating loose ends too. Protect their ongoing criminal enterprise. Sarah knew they had uncovered just the beginning of an international conspiracy that threatened the security of royal collections throughout Europe. The recovery of the crown jewels had been a victory, but the larger battle was just beginning. Sarah's investigation took on international dimensions. As evidence mounted of coordinated thefts across European royal collections, Interpol assigned Agent Henry Dubois to coordinate with the London team, bringing expertise in transnational art crimes and cultural property disputes. Agent Dubois was a seasoned investigator from Lyon, with 20 years of experience tracking stolen artwork and historical artifacts. His files contained disturbing patterns that connected seemingly unrelated thefts across multiple countries. Meridian Security appears under different names in various jurisdictions, Dubois explained during their first briefing. They operate through shell companies and use local contacts to avoid detection. The international investigation revealed that Victoria Ashford, Meridian's managing director, had been recruiting former intelligence officers and military personnel to execute increasingly sophisticated operations. Is building a private army of specialists, Dubois observed. Each operation uses different personnel, making it difficult to establish patterns or identify recurring suspects. Sarah learned that Countess Isabella was indeed in Switzerland, but she wasn't hiding. Instead, she was meeting with lawyers and insurance representatives to pursue legitimate claims for her family's historical treasures. The theft may have been designed to strengthen her legal position, Sarah realized. If the crown jewels were recovered through her cooperation, it would demonstrate good faith in future negotiations. Mark discovered financial connections between Meridian Security and several major insurance companies that specialized in covering high-value art and cultural artifacts. The relationship suggested potential insurance fraud on a massive scale. They steal the items, collect insurance payouts, then arrange recoveries for additional fees, Mark explained. It's a perfect double-dipping scheme. Dr. Foster's continued analysis of evidence from Whitfield's apartment revealed something troubling. The handwriting in his supposed confession showed signs of stress and possible coercion. The letter was written under duress, Dr. Foster concluded. Someone forced him to write this before killing him. The forensic evidence supported murder rather than suicide, but proving it would require identifying who had access to Whitfield's apartment and possessed the skills to stage such a sophisticated crime. Victoria Ashford agreed to another interview, this time with her lawyer present. She maintained her position that Meridian Security provided only legal services, but her composure seemed strained. Former employees were involved in illegal activities. We would want to distance ourselves from such actions, Victoria stated carefully. Our reputation depends on maintaining the highest ethical standards. Sarah pressed about the business card found at Camillas' estate. How do you explain your company's card being at the scene of criminal activity? Victoria's lawyer interjected before she could answer. Business cards can be obtained by anyone. Their presence doesn't prove company involvement in any wrongdoing. The legal maneuvering was frustrating, but Sarah expected resistance from such a sophisticated operation. She needed concrete evidence to break through their professional defenses. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rebecca Martinez, the assistant estate manager, who had unknowingly authorized the fake construction work, remembered additional details about the fraudulent paperwork. The work order included a very specific clause about preserving historical integrity, Rebecca recalled. It mentioned consulting with heritage preservation specialists before proceeding. This detail led Mark to investigate heritage consulting firms that might have been involved in planning the cellar modification. One company, Historical Preservation Associates, had no record of working at the estate but showed suspicious payment patterns in their accounts. The firm's director, Dr. Margaret Thornfield, was a legitimate academic with expertise in architectural preservation. However, her assistant had been handling administrative matters and financial arrangements without proper oversight. "I trusted Caroline completely," Dr. Thornfield explained when questioned. "She handled client communications and project documentation while I focused on research and site visits." Caroline Fletcher had disappeared 3 days after Whitfield's death, emptying her bank accounts and leaving no forwarding address. Her personnel file revealed a background in art history and previous employment with auction houses that specialized in estate sales. Agent Dubois provided crucial intelligence about Caroline's activities across Europe. She's been using different identities to work with heritage firms in multiple countries, always in administrative roles that gave her access to documentation and client information. Sarah realized Caroline was a key figure in the conspiracy, using her position to gather intelligence on valuable collections and identify potential targets for theft. The international investigation expanded as evidence emerged of Caroline's involvement in thefts from royal collections in Denmark and Luxembourg. The pattern was consistent. She would infiltrate organizations with access to cultural treasures, gather intelligence, then disappear before the thefts were discovered. "She's been building a database of European royal collections for years," Dubois concluded. "The information would be invaluable for planning sophisticated theft operations." Victoria Ashford's facade began cracking under international pressure. Swiss authorities froze Meridian Securities accounts pending investigation, and several employees were detained for questioning in different countries. "The operation is unraveling," James Mitchell observed, "but the main players are still free and dangerous." Sarah received disturbing news from Palace Security. Intelligence suggested another attempt might be planned for the upcoming state visit by European dignitaries, when multiple royal collections would be on display. "They're accelerating their timeline," Sir Charles warned. "If they're going to make a major move, it would be during the state visit when security attention is divided among multiple targets." The investigation team worked frantically to identify all potential threats before the diplomatic event. Security measures were quietly increased. The challenge was enormous, given the international scope of the conspiracy. Caroline Fletcher surfaced unexpectedly in Prague, where Czech authorities detained her at the request of Interpol. Her arrest provided the first opportunity to interrogate someone with direct knowledge of the operation's structure and planning. "She's our best hope for understanding how deep this conspiracy goes," Sarah told her team as they prepared to travel to Prague for the interrogation. The confrontation with Caroline would determine whether they could prevent the larger theft planned for the state visit. Sarah knew that failure would mean not just the loss of priceless cultural treasures, but a devastating blow to the security of royal institutions across Europe. Time was running out, and the most dangerous phase of the conspiracy was about to begin. The recovery of the crown jewels had been just the opening move in a complex game where the stakes kept rising. Caroline Fletcher held the keys to unraveling the entire operation, but getting her to cooperate would require careful interrogation and perhaps offering immunity in exchange for information about her dangerous associates. The interrogation room in Prague was stark and windowless. With Caroline Fletcher seated across from Sarah, Mark, and Agent Dubois, Caroline appeared younger than her 35 years, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. "I want full immunity before I say anything," Caroline stated flatly, "and witness protection." These people will kill me if they think I'm talking. Sarah studied Caroline carefully. The woman's fear seemed genuine, suggesting she understood the deadly seriousness of the conspiracy she had helped create. That depends on what you can tell us, Sarah replied. We need everything: names, locations, planned operations, and the full scope of what you've been involved in. Caroline's lawyer, a Prague-based advocate specializing in international criminal cases, advised her to consider the offer carefully. The evidence against her was substantial, but cooperation might reduce her eventual sentence. The operation is bigger than you realize, Caroline began slowly. It's not just about stealing treasures. They're building a network to control the entire European art and antiquities market. Agent Dubois leaned forward intently. Explain what you mean by control. Caroline described a sophisticated scheme involving theft, insurance fraud, legal challenges, and market manipulation. They steal pieces to create artificial scarcity, then use legal disputes to tie up ownership while prices increase dramatically. The revelation was staggering in its scope and implications. The conspiracy wasn't just targeting royal collections, but attempting to manipulate the entire international market for cultural artifacts. Victoria Ashford is just one part of the operation, Caroline continued. The real leader is someone called the Collector. I never met them personally, but they coordinate everything from somewhere in Eastern Europe. Sarah pressed for more specific information. What about the planned theft during the state visit? Caroline's expression grew even more serious. That's not a theft, it's a distraction. While security focuses on protecting the crown jewels display, teams will be hitting 3 other targets simultaneously. The news sent shockwaves through the interrogation team. They had been preparing for one major theft, while the criminals planned multiple coordinated strikes across London. The targets are the British Museum's medieval collection, the Wallace Collection's armor gallery, and the Victoria and Albert Museum's jewelry exhibition, Caroline revealed. All during the opening ceremony, when police resources will be concentrated at Buckingham Palace, Mark immediately contacted London to alert the respective museum security departments. The timing was perfect from the criminals' perspective. Maximum distraction with minimum security presence at secondary targets. Caroline provided detailed information about the teams assigned to each target. They've been planning this for 2 years, studying guard rotations, security systems, and escape routes. Agent Dubois began coordinating with museum security services across London, while Sarah continued, questioning Caroline about the operations structure and financing. The money comes from private collectors who want specific pieces, Caroline explained. They place orders years in advance and pay premium prices for items that can never be legally sold. Sarah realized they were dealing with a black market art ring that served the world's wealthiest criminals and corrupt collectors. The stolen pieces would disappear into private collections, never to be seen again. Caroline's most shocking revelation concerned the operation's political connections. Some government officials are involved, providing intelligence about security measures and diplomatic schedules. The implications were terrifying. If high-level officials were compromised, the conspiracy could reach into the highest levels of European governments and royal households. I need names, Sarah demanded. Which officials are involved? Caroline hesitated, clearly terrified of the consequences. There's someone in the British Foreign Office, codename Windsor. They've been providing information about royal family schedules and security protocols. The codename was obviously chosen to mock the royal family while concealing the traitor's identity. Sarah knew that exposing a spy within the British government would require the highest levels of security clearance and discretion. Meanwhile, London police were quietly positioning additional security around the threatened museums. The challenge was preventing the thefts without alerting the criminals that their plans had been exposed. Caroline provided crucial intelligence about the timing and methods planned for each target. The British Museum team will use a construction crew disguise, similar to what they did at the estate. The Wallace collection will be hit during a supposed fire alarm evacuation. Sarah began understanding the sophisticated nature of the operation. Each theft was planned to exploit specific vulnerabilities and create confusion that would delay effective response. The Victoria and Albert Museum is the primary target, Caroline revealed. They want the Cheapside Hoard jewelry collection. It's worth over £50 million and practically impossible to replace. Agent Dubois coordinated with Interpol to track down other members of the criminal network across Europe. Several arrests were made simultaneously in France, Germany, and Italy. Disrupting the organization's communication networks, the state visit was scheduled to begin in just 48 hours. Sarah's team worked around the clock to identify all potential threats while maintaining the appearance that nothing had been discovered. Sir Charles Pemberton coordinated with the highest levels of government to address the security implications. "We're dealing with a threat that goes beyond simple theft," he observed grimly. "This could destabilize confidence in our institutions." Caroline's final revelation was the most disturbing. "There's a backup plan if the museum thefts fail. They're prepared to target the royal family directly during the state banquet." Sarah felt a chill of fear. The conspiracy had evolved from theft to potential assassination, with implications that could affect international relations and European security. "The Windsor trader will provide access to the banquet security arrangements," Caroline explained. They planned to replace one of the catering staff with an assassin. The threat required immediate action at the highest levels of government. Sarah found herself briefing cabinet ministers and intelligence chiefs about a conspiracy that threatened both national treasures and royal lives. The final phase of the investigation became a race against time. While maintaining normal appearances for the state visit, security services worked frantically to identify and neutralize all aspects of the criminal network. Carolyn Fletcher's cooperation proved crucial in preventing what could have been the crime of the century. Her information allowed authorities to intercept the criminal teams before they could execute their devastating plans. Victoria Ashford was arrested at London's Heathrow Airport attempting to flee the country. Her capture led to the discovery of additional evidence and the identification of the mysterious Windsor trader within the Foreign Office. The state visit proceeded successfully, with the royal family and visiting dignitaries unaware of how close they had come to disaster. The crown jewels remained secure, and the threatened museum collections were protected. Sarah reflected on the case as she watched the final arrests being made. What had begun with an anonymous letter about missing sapphires had uncovered an international conspiracy that threatened the cultural heritage of Europe. The recovery of Queen Victoria's sapphires had been just the beginning of a much larger victory against organized crime. Operating at the highest levels of society, Carolyn Fletcher's courage in exposing the truth had prevented not just theft, but potential tragedy that could have changed history.